Happy Monday morning. I hope that all of you are in good health and that everyone had a refreshing and a replenishing Shabbat. As we start this Monday morning, I am thinking about how I no longer really make a difference between the weekend and the rest of the week. Although Shabbat feels uniquely special, Monday morning isn't so crummy anymore. It is nice to see all of you, at least virtually. So I wanted to share a great story with you. I'm going to read it off the paper, so enjoy my forehead. There once was a king who was growing older in years. He couldn't figure out which of his 3 children would be the one to assume his throne and rule the kingdom. His eldest son was strong and brave and a warrior and a leader. His middle son was brilliant, quick, and witty. He could outsmart just about anybody. And his youngest child, his daughter, she had potential, but she was so young. He loved them all equally and wanted each of them to take over the throne. He thought and finally came up with an idea. In the middle of this picturesque royal garden, there sat a small shack. "Whoever can fill this shack to capacity," the king exclaimed, "will take over my throne." Each child would have 7 days to fill the shack with anything they chose. The oldest child decided to go first. His siblings watched as he lugged stones and rocks of all shapes and sizes and tossed them into the shack. Day after day, he carried these heavy loads. When there was no more room left, he filled the cracks and crevices with small pebbles to fill the space to capacity. At the end of the week, the king walked down the winding, narrow path that led into the garden and reached to open the door of the shack. "My son," the king smiled, "you filled the shack to capacity. You will be my next king." He then ordered his servants to empty the shack. The middle son, the smartest and fastest, took his turn to outwit his older brother. The others watched as he ran back and forth from the chicken coop to the shack, carrying bags and bags full of feathers and dumping the feathers into the shack time after time. When there was no more room in the shack, he jumped onto the feathers to make space for more. Before long, the entire shack was filled to capacity with feathers, and so was the rest of the garden. At the end of the week, the king came walking down that winding, narrow path again that led into the garden. The entire garden looked white as snow. The king reached out his hand and opened the door. "You have surpassed your brother," the king exclaimed. "With the rocks, there were still holes left over in the crevices. But with feathers, however, you have managed to fill the room to capacity. You may be the next king," he said. Once again, he ordered his servants to empty the shack. It was now the youngest child's turn. The brothers pleaded with their father not to let her compete, or at least to wait until she was older. "She doesn't understand, father. This is the whole kingdom on her shoulders," they declared. The king would not hear of it. "You got your turn, now it's hers." The first day passed, and the shack was empty. The second day, the shack was still empty. The third day, still nothing had changed. Now the townspeople had heard of the competition and began crowding around the palace, wondering what this princess had planned. The fourth day passed now, and the shack was still empty. The brothers continued to plead with their father. "She's making a mockery of the throne," they said. But the king just waited. The 5th and 6th day passed, and the shack remained completely empty. On the 7th day, the king slowly walked down that winding, narrow path that led into the scenic garden. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Scores and scores of people followed behind him, wondering and waiting of what would be. The king reached out his hand to open the door of the shack. People pushed and shoved to try to get a view of what was inside. A stillness passed over the crowd. The door slowly opened, and the shack was empty. Yet before a word could be uttered, the youngest princess passed under the arm of her father and headed straight into the shack. She knelt down, reached into the folds of her robe, and revealed a small candlestick. She reached back into the folds of her robe and pulled out a candle. She proceeded to light the candle, and the entire shack was filled to capacity. It was filled with light. The king smiled. "You, my child, will take over my throne." The crowd cheered. The brothers also cheered. And all was as it should be. This terrific tale reminds us that no matter how we fill our time, our space, our hearts, that we must fill it to capacity. And we must always seek to use our imaginations, to use our hearts. We must always take the time to think outside of the box and to realize that only when we give all of ourselves can we truly fill the space with our entity. So as we move into this week, I hope that we'll set intentions that no matter what we choose to do, we do it with our full kavanah, our full intention. I hope that we have a week of health and a week of connectivity. And I look forward to seeing you all on Shabbat at 11:30 Friday morning for Shabbat Shirah. Take good care. Bye-bye.